Further debate? I recognize the member for Timiskaming Cochrane.
Thank you, Speaker. It's always an honour to be able to stand in this House and speak on behalf of the people of Timiskaming Cochrane and on behalf of my party. And today on combating the Human Trafficking Act. But I would be remiss if I didn't, like many of my colleagues, start my remarks about the news that broke of the 215 children buried in a mass grave at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. I think what hurts us the most, and although we know that these things happen, but our innocence was stolen as their lives were stolen. And what hurts me the most, as someone who grew up in the Christian faith, is that those children weren't treated as humans. And the proof is that they were thrown in a mass grave and never identified. That steals our innocence. We stand in this House and recite the Lord's Prayer, those of us who are Christian, regardless of your faith. And when our own religious institutions, and I'm not picking on one, there is lots of blame to go around and lots of blame in the government to go around too. But institutions that claim to represent faith and claim to care about the afterlife and claimed, obviously, they didn't care much about the kids in that hole. And as a white man, I can honestly say, I don't think I've ever experienced discrimination. And as a white man, if it was 215 white kids in that hole, there would have been investigations, and long ago, it's kind of fitting, Speaker, that we are talking about human trafficking today. Because there are things that are very similar. I have no experience, none, in what the First Nations have gone through in our country. But I have had, through the honor of being elected here, I have had the honor of talking to the member of Quetno, becoming his friend. And some of the things that he says in passing that he doesn't even think about makes me think very deeply. Thoughts that I never, ever would have thought before I met him. So, like many of you, I've got kids, 3 lovely daughters and a son, and they went to high school in my hometown, right? And they were home every night because teenagers are teenagers and you want to be able to see them, hopefully help them, hold them. But for many First Nations, even now, grade 8's as far as you go. And then they send you to the city. A city that you have never had any experience in. Never. It's like my kids go from grade 8 and then I send them to Toronto. I barely survived coming to Toronto when I was elected here. It was so foreign to me. I had never been on a subway. I was elected to represent people. I had never done these things. And yet, we in this province still expect children to go from their homes to the city, to board, to go to high school. Now, that isn't the same, obviously, as what happened at residential schools. But there is a similarity, because we know, and the parents of those kids know, that they are at a much, much bigger risk of getting into trouble, like being trafficked. A much bigger risk. Yet, are we doing anything about that? Those kids come from places where there's no water, very little housing. Something I've never experienced. I experienced it through the member of Quetna. And then we put them into our society, and we wonder why their numbers in social services and why they're higher. That's pretty basic stuff. There is incredibly complicated issues, but a pretty basic one is keeping your kids within the family unit for the length of their public education, like high school. I think that's a pretty simple one. And that's something that none of us would stand for. And that's something that is normalized. And I was going to say them, but not. Normalized for people of this province. You want to talk about fixing things? Because our collective innocence has been stolen. You know, and we're all shocked about what happened by what was found in Kamloops. And you know what? We should make a big effort to find what truly happened everywhere. But we also, the thing about history, you have to know history because you need to learn from it. And as advanced as our society is, the fact, and I'm going to focus on this one, the fact that those families are still broken up, they are still sent to a foreign society, which has proven to be, in many ways, more damaging to people than their own society, and we continue to do it. So, this bill, does this bill do some things that could help? Yes. Is it fully the solution? No. I'm focusing on high school and kids, in my own experience, because someone who's been spoken about in this legislature several times, Carly Church, she works for Victim Services of Durham, helping kids who are in human trafficking. I knew Carly when she was small. Carly grew up in my hometown. She's the same age as our kids. We held the prom party at our farm every year, and she was there. Right? And during that time, I don't really recommend anybody to hold a prom party. They get really exciting. But you would have thought I would have figured it out after number 4. But we never, at that time, I didn't know what human trafficking was. And Carly she was trapped, and now she helps others, and I commend her. But think of the advantages she had compared to some others. Think of the advantages that we have compared to many. So I didn't have the advantage, or the privilege, I wasn't on that committee. And I understand the one thing that this bill, a few things, but so the police now have the power to go into hotels, I understand, but not into Airbnbs. And I listened to the comments, well, that's because they're municipal, and that's because, but we all know, I hope we know, that as you clamp down on the hotels, you know what's going to happen. This is a business, not a very nice one, and it's going to migrate to where you don't clamp down, like Airbnbs. And I've listened, and oh yeah, we've got a strategy we're going to look at in 5 years. Good, no, not complaining. But you can't wait 5 years to look at the Airbnbs. I get kind of a kick out of it, actually. Not kick, I don't. I listen to the members on the other side. Oh, but this is municipal, and, you know, we just can't go there. This is the government that had Toronto Council in the middle of a municipal election. Like, in the middle of a municipal election, in Canada's biggest city, you have the council. Yet now, when we are dealing, and I don't question that the government is sincere in trying to, we disagree with some of the mechanisms they're using, but I don't question that the government is sincere in trying to address part of the problem. But don't tell me that, oh, this is just too big a one for us to handle right now. Just, we have to deal with like separate councils, and we have, okay. If you're really serious about this, find a way to deal with Airbnbs and whatever comes after. Because we all know, when you close one door, someone is going to push another one open. And they're not friendly people. Now, is it, you know, I don't begrudge the government for saying, okay, we can't, but I don't buy, oh no, I do not buy that this is too big an issue to deal with because you have to deal with municipals. I don't buy that. I really don't. This is an incredibly important issue, and people are suffering, I think dying, right? And we're sitting here, this is too big an issue. I am willing to bet that 100 years ago, 60 years ago, there were people talking about residential schools, and there was others saying, oh, yeah, don't gotta go there. That's too big an issue. Oh, that's the jurisdiction of the churches, or that's this, or that's that. And those kids ended up in a hole. Now, we are in a position to do something about kids, about people who are being threatened, and this is a step. I think, kind of a step sideways in one way or another. But we cannot wait 5 years to talk about the monstrous size loophole. Not even a loophole. The monstrous size escape hatch that you've given to these people. We know it. We know it. And by looking the other way, we are as guilty as the legislators were back then when they looked the other way, when they knew that Indigenous kids were being treated the way they were and that they were dying. People knew then. People know now. We're sitting in the same chairs. So, is this bill a step? It's a step. Is this bill hopefully going to save some people? Hopefully. But is this bill going to leave all kinds of kids by the wayside to be abused and, quite frankly, tortured? It is. And we all know it. So let's not wait 5 years. Let's not turn the other way. Let's acknowledge the shortcomings, do what we can do, acknowledge the shortcomings, and move ahead. And fix the hatches we've left these people. And provide support. Like, think about kids that have to go to a big city who've never been, who live in a place, actually who live in a beautiful, right? They live close to nature, and then we force them to go to a city, a foreign environment that they've never had any access to. And we wonder why they end up in trouble. And that's happening. This isn't 100 years from now. This happens all the time. And my hope is that we don't have to lower flags 20 years from now from the things we're finding out that we missed today. Because I hope that we are more intelligent, or not intelligent, more knowledgeable than we were, than our predecessors were. I'd like to close. I'm incredibly honored to be able to stand in this house and sometimes say the things that I say. But I hope that we work to make this bill is done. It's gone through all its readings. But there's so much more. There is so much more to do. And we know that. And those shoes on the front of the steps, they should remind us that we have the power. We have the power to do more than talk about strategies, and do more than talk about it's somebody else's issue. We have that power. And we need to use it. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. The member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Well, thank you very much, Speaker. And I have to say, the end of the member from Timiskaming Cochrane's speech, I think, really sums up what this bill is actually trying to do, Mr. Speaker, and that is not leave anybody out. And when we look at what the opposition wants to call Airbnbs, when in fact they're short-term rentals. And short-term rentals can take on a different look, feel, regulation, all kinds of different things in every municipality across this province, and they're all handled differently. Part of the reason why the Solicitor General and the others that are building this framework and this legislation are doing more consultation on that is so we don't leave anybody out. And I think it's unfair, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, for that member to stand there and accuse this bill of doing that. And I'm hoping that we're going to see support for this bill. The member from Brampton East wouldn't commit to it, so I'm going to ask the member from Timiskaming Cochrane, will you today support this bill at third reading and get it passed so that we can save more people here in the province of Ontario and that we aren't leaving anybody behind?
Reply. Member for Timiskaming Cochrane.
Thank you, Speaker. I appreciate the question, and I appreciate the members' comments. They're always thoughtful. I'm never going to apologize for pointing out issues in legislation that leave people vulnerable. I'm not saying that I'm not accusing the government of not trying, and I said it's a step. But again, this is the government who took on the City of Toronto in the middle of an election. So, and as for I'm assuming that there's going to be a vote soon, and you will find out. Thank you.
Member for Brampton East.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to just thank the member, MPP Vanthof. He's truly someone that I think the entire caucus looks to for leadership, for direction. He's someone who has a lot more years in this House than the rest of us, and we're very thankful for the mentorship he's provided. You bring up this point time and again of Airbnb, and it's a very important point, and I really like how you put it about, the Conservative government had the political will to have City Council in the middle of an election, but all of a sudden it's too complicated to address this issue of Airbnb. If you can expand on this point about Airbnb,
Order.
the fact that the government has the ability to ensure that no one's left behind, but they're purposely choosing to leave it outside the piece of legislation.
Government side will come to order. To reply, member for Timiskaming Cochrane.
Thank you, Speaker, and I will leave out the part where the member said I was old in a friendly way. But whether you call them Airbnbs or short-term rentals, we know the issue is there. We know the issue is there, and by closing one or trying to close one with hotels, you're forcing more into short-term. And so we need to identify, or we need to identify what the roadblocks are to overcome, and we need to overcome them. Because driving this issue, and it's illegal activity, but driving it more underground
Response.
is a problem. And there was the political will to move mountains when you wanted to. Is there the political will to move the short-term rental mountain?
Brantford Brant.
Thank you, Speaker. I listened to the member from Timiskaming Cochrane, and I understand and agree with the difficulty that he has representing people in this place where you feel so far removed from the lived experience. I have heard the stories from constituents in my riding that I have the honor to represent who, as children, were walking down the street and a car pulled up and offered them ice cream. And they got in that car and they never saw their home again. Now, when we were at committee, we heard that human trafficking is drastically overreported in the province of Ontario. And in fact, the only human trafficking that actually happens is probably at migrant workers who work on farms. I reject that wholeheartedly.
Question?
I think that you do too. I was wondering if you could expound further on the comparison between the residential school system and how much we abhor that and the crime of human trafficking today. Thank you.
To respond. Member for Timiskaming Cochrane.
I'd like to thank the member for that question. It is a very thoughtful one. And I don't think we can deny that human trafficking is happening. There is more to this issue than simply trafficking. And there is a risk of I believe the word is conflating, of sex work, and it's not all as cut and dried as it seems. Is there an issue? Definitely. But knowing that makes it even more important for us to identify all the places and make legislation that's effective in all areas where it could be happening, not just some, and concentrating it in others.
Thank you. Next, we have the member for Sudbury.
Speaker, the member for Timiskaming Centre, or Cochrane, sorry, he started his debate talking about the 215 tiny bodies that were found outside of the Kamloops Residential School. It reminded me in 2018, I volunteered for the Walking with Your Sisters demonstration. If you can imagine this entire chamber with no furniture, just with moccasin lasts, the decorated tops of the moccasins to represent the many murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And one of the stats that stood out for me is that Indigenous people are 4% of the population, but they make up 16% of female homicides. And I think about those graves and those tiny shoes and those tiny lasts, Speaker, and we're probably going to find some undocumented graves out there from people from Indigenous communities who have been human trafficked. And many of them come from northern ridings and rural ridings. And I just want to ask the member, what resources exist right now in northern ridings and rural ridings, and what would you recommend? Thank you.
And to respond.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank the member from Sudbury. And again, a very thoughtful question and a hard question. The preamble, very hard to answer. Because I have no experience. I cannot speak on the experience of Indigenous people. I can speak on the general lack of many services in rural Ontario. And the more sparsely populated, the bigger the problem. Because services are, and I understand this, services tend to be concentrated where there are more people. I'll give you an example, during COVID, someone from the Canadian Mental Health Association, and I stole their quote, said that the district of Timiskaming was a treatment desert for addiction because the treatment beds are not in the district. So during COVID, there was effectively no treatment for people in Timiskaming. That is an example of what is still happening, Speaker.
One very brief question. Member for Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, I wanted to understand a little more about why the member is calling our consultations into various types of accommodations Airbnbs. I think that's kind of looking down on the topic, given the very sensitive nature of what we're doing here, and given the fact that not every city or municipality can provide the same type of accommodations. Why does a member not think it is important that we cater to the needs of everyone when we're dealing with this very important issue? Thank you.
Member for Timiskaming.
Thank you for the question. I think it's very important. I think we also, province, should also provide the horsepower to those municipalities so they can actually look at how the regulations should be implemented. It's not just telling people what to do, it's giving them the resources to actually, same for people It's not just enforcing, it's giving people the resources to make things better. Thank you.